So we will get started. And again, thank you. Good morning for joining me for this McKinney-Vento programming webinar. My name is Vanessa Waters, and I am the McKinney-Vento and Immigrant Grant Manager at the Tennessee Department of Education. Also have here to help facilitate this morning, Hannah Gribble, who is the Title III and Migrant Education Program Grant Manager. The slide deck will be available today, as well as the recording. Hannah, would you like to say anything?
No, I'm good. Just popping on so everybody can see for a second.
This role, and so maybe some of you have not had a chance to see her, but this is who took Jan Lanier's place, and so we are very glad to have her on the team. And we've thrown her in, and she's going to start monitoring and doing everything related to EL. So welcome, Hannah. So we'll go ahead and get started. Maybe not by meeting myself. So at the Tennessee Department of Education, we ground our work in our strategic plan, That's for All. The plan focuses on 3 priorities: academics, student readiness, and educators for all Tennessee students. As you all know, the work you are doing with students in transition is strongly connected to all 3 of these areas. The support that you provide to educators, students, and families is crucial. So today we're going to look at the program purpose. We're going to look at the definition and rights under McKinney-Vento. We're going to talk about unaccompanied homeless youth. We'll dig into the local liaison responsibilities, and we'll talk about effective practices and collaborations. And of course, I'll close with reminders and resources. So let's look at the program purpose. The purpose of the McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth, EHCY program, is to ensure that each homeless child or youth has equal access to the same free, appropriate public education, including a public preschool education as provided to other children and youth. Programming important. The U.S. Department of Education has set a standard for the overall statewide graduation rate for students experiencing homelessness. The standard is 90% or above. As you can see, Tennessee went from 89.6% in 1920 to 88.7% in 2020-21. That is a 22% decrease from previous years. You can also see that in 2020-21, we identified 14,386 students at the department, versus 18,482 students in 2019-20. So we had a big decrease in identification of McKinney-Vento students. And of course, your homeless residencies remains the same, highly concentrated in your doubled up category. Then you have 11% for motel, hotel, and shelters at 5%. Of course, you have your 3% for unsheltered. Again, that's why doubled up comes up a lot in your conversations about identifying McKinney-Vento, because you do have a higher population of your doubled up students. So we won't look at the definition and rights under McKinney-Vento. It's extremely important that you do understand the definition. So under the federal law, the definition for homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act is children or youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including children who are sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason, living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or camping grounds due to lack of alternate adequate accommodations, living in emergency transitional shelters or abandoned hospitals, living in a public or private place not ordinarily used for as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings, living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings, and who are migratory children living in the above circumstances. Homelessness, you want to consider 3 things. A child or youth who lives in a situation that is not fixed, it's not regular and adequate is considered homeless. So fixed being stationary, permanent, and not subject to change. Regular would be used on a nightly basis, and adequate would be sufficient for meeting the physical, psychological, and safety needs typically met in a home environment. If a child or youth lacks any one of these conditions, their living condition is considered McKinney-Vento eligible. So when you're determining eligibility, you want to ask a few qualifying questions. Why did the family or youth move in with another family? Did, for example, the parent want to save money to get out of apartment living, and maybe they wanted to do more of the home living? Or did the parent want to have a free built-in childcare by moving in with grandparents or a family member? Those situations would not be McKinney-Vento eligible, but maybe this parent lost their job, or they were evicted from their apartment or the place they were staying, and they had to move in with the grandparent or with another family member. That family would be considered McKinney-Vento eligible due to loss of a home to economic hardship or evicted. So you also want to ask if they're doubled up. Again, why are they doubled up? Is it because it's a cultural thing and the families feel like under their culture, religion, their culture and their religious reasons, they want to live together? Then they would probably not be eligible for McKinney-Vento services. But if they're doubled up, maybe again back to the economic hardship, or maybe their house was flooded, or they lost their house due to a tornado, then those situations would cause that student to be McKinney-Vento eligible due to loss of housing. Again, you just want to really ask those qualifying questions. You want to go back to the definition, and you want to see if it's fixed, regular, and adequate. And the reasoning behind it being doubled up. It's important to remember that student's living situation is part of the educational record and protected under FERPA. So when you're gathering the information, you want to ensure that it's done reasonably, unintrusively, and lawfully. It's important to remember that you should not conduct invasive surveillance of families or youth, including following them, observing them from outside of their home or their residence. You also don't want to be talking to neighbors or other people around the neighborhood. It's important that if you do need to make a home visit to verify McKinney-Vento eligibility, that you're sending a trained staff member, such as your homeless liaison, maybe your school social worker or counselor, to do those home visits. It's highly recommended that if you do have eligibility questions, that you do at least 2 to 3 home visits to determine eligibility, because one home visit will really not be enough to determine that. You can do an announced visit and an unannounced visit. Again, you really want to be unintrusive, but you also want to make sure that you're verifying eligibility if you feel like it's a concern. So, like I mentioned, rights to privacy. Schools must treat information about a homeless child or youth living situation as a student education record, which is protected again under the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. And LEAs must obtain prior written consent from the parent or eligible guardians or unaccompanied youth in order to disclose any of the information from a student's educational record. So scenario that I want to go through. Billy has been living in a motel with his family for a little over a year. His family has moved in personal furniture and bunk beds for Billy and his sister. His parents pay for the room fee every 2 weeks. Under the McKinney-Vento definition, would Billy be eligible for service? A, you'll need more information. B, no, this is a more of a permanent arrangement. C, B, yes, eligible for services. So I want you to think back to the definition. Is it fixed, not subject to change, permanent, or stationary? Is it regular, which is consistent, routine, predictable, and a normal standard? And last, is it adequate, which is sufficient to meet the physical and psychological needs of the family? I'm going to need just a couple of seconds to think about that. Scenario, you will need more information. Oh, thanks, Jessica, for dropping in the chat box. C. Yes, you will need more information because you want to know, does the family have access to kitchen and cooking facilities? Does Billy have a place to study and do his schoolwork? Does Billy sleep in one room with his family? Does Billy have adequate access to needed utilities, electricity, water, and other needed services? So you want to ask, is Billy's mom making his dinner on a hot plate every night? If so, that's not going to be adequate. Does Billy's parents have access to a full kitchen where he can make nightly meals and prepare his lunch or his breakfast on the weekends? That's kind of the questions you're really looking at to really see if they're going to be adequate for this student. Can he have a quiet place to study and do his homework? If you're staying in a one-bedroom hotel room, the likelihood of having a place to study and do your homework is probably not going to be adequate. So again, it takes kind of asking some questions and seeing if this family really is qualified for McKinney-Vento services, but you want to make sure you're not being intrusive. So let's look at another population that is kind of hard to identify as unaccompanied homeless youth. So the term unaccompanied youth includes a youth not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. A guardianship issue alone without homelessness does not convey McKinney-Vento eligibility. The next two slides, I've provided a couple of McKinney-Vento eligibility scenarios. For scenario one, the student's living arrangement, one, meets the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless and does not have fixed, regular, or adequate housing. And two, the student is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. Therefore, the unaccompanied homeless child or youth is McKinney-Vento eligible. Two, first, student's living arrangement does not meet the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless. He or she has fixed, regular, and adequate housing. However, the student is an unaccompanied youth. Because the unaccompanied youth does not meet the definition of homeless, the child or youth is not McKinney-Vento eligible. So scenario, and you can drop your answers in the chat box like Jessica did. Which of the following would you consider homeless? A youth moved in with his friend's family when his parents kicked him out of their home. The friend's parents said that he could only stay for a week. Do you think A would be homeless or non-homeless? And for B, a youth has lived with her grandmother ever since her mother was incarcerated 2 years ago. The grandmother intends to allow the youth to remain with her until her mother is released from prison. Do you think student B would be homeless? Michelle says that student A would be considered homeless. Anyone else have any thoughts? Or any A or B answers they want to drop in the chat box? So Michelle, B, possibility the housing is inadequate. Yes, good point, Michelle. So for A, the youth is considered eligible for an unaccompanied homeless youth because he was kicked out of his home and his current living situation is just going to be temporary because that family had said you can stay here temporarily. For situation B, yes, more than likely it probably would not be a McKinney-Vento situation, but as Michelle pointed out, because maybe the grandmother is living in an inadequate housing situation, that possibly can make them McKinney-Vento, but probably not McKinney-Vento eligible because it's stable and it's fixed. Again, the only way that would probably not be McKinney-Vento would be if it's an adequate housing situation, or excuse me, a not adequate housing situation. So let's look at local liaison responsibilities. Under the McKinney-Vento Act, every LEA must designate an appropriate staff person to serve as the local homeless education liaison. Your role as a liaison will serve as the key homeless education contact for the LEA. You're going to provide that support to those homeless students and those families. And so, again, it's important that your staff, your LEA, know who you are, who the point of contact is, because it's very important that those services begin immediately, as well as when you're doing federal monitoring, that is a question that's asked, who the homeless liaison is, and your staff does need to know who that person of contact would be. So if you're new to the role, you probably are thinking, what are my responsibilities? What do I have to do in order to make sure that I am in federal guidance and know what I need to be providing? So we're going to be looking at identification, enrollment, and school selection. We're going to talk about best interest and transportation. We're also going to kind of look at dispute resolution a little bit. We'll talk about professional development, and we're going to look at preschool, high school, higher education, and a HUD. To be able to identify students experiencing homelessness, again, it's important to go back to that definition. Fixed, regular, and adequate. I keep saying that, but that is going to be your key to determining McKinney-Vento eligibility. Fixed, regular, and adequate. Identification is the first step to connecting homeless students with information, resources, and supports to have them academically and educationally successful. So again, you really want to make sure you're identifying your students and supporting them with resources and supports. So what are some ways that you can ensure that homeless situations are identified? You need to be providing targeted outreach and gathering activities. And what that's going to look like is you want to be sure that as a best practice that you're including a housing or nighttime residency questionnaire in the LEA's enrollment packet, so that you are screening for possible McKinney-Vento eligibility on the front end of enrollment. You can find samples of a housing questionnaire and E-Plan in TDO resources. If you haven't already been into E-Plan, there is a great section for McKinney-Vento. It has a toolkit, it has lots of pullouts that you can use for supporting your homeless programming. You can also visit the National Center for Homeless Education. They have a lot of great resources that you can also use. You want to make sure that you're providing targeted outreach so that you can share your information about homeless programming. You want to make sure that those homeless rights are posted throughout your LEA, throughout all your schools, your homeless rights, so that parents can see them and know what their rights are under the federal law. Those posters need to be, again, in areas where they can be seen. If they're hidden away on a poster board or on a bulletin board tucked under another piece of paper, then that's not going to be where a parent or student can see the services and who to contact for that information. So again, placing those homeless poster rights throughout your schools, throughout your communities. You want to make sure that you're posting those posters for your unaccompanied homeless youth to see as well. You want public places such as your grocery stores, your shelters, your libraries, YMCAs, that parents or children may frequent those YMCAs for the shower services or other services that the YMCA may offer. Churches are a good place to put these posters. Again, you really want to make sure that you're reaching those communities, those families, so they know what services are available. And then you also want to put your information in your student handbooks on your LEA website and include brochures. when I'm looking at Homeless Liaisons websites, or LEA websites, a lot of times I'm not seeing any information about McKinney-Vento programming for the LEA. And so as a family, as a parent, as an unaccompanied homeless youth, I want to make sure that I can find that information easily so I know who to reach out to for services if I feel like I may be McKinney-Vento eligible. So you want to make sure that you're providing that information in any kind of LEA website or brochures that you may have. So when you're using the housing questionnaire, LEA should be giving the questionnaire to every student every year, not just new enrolling students. So again, under the law, McKinney-Vento says that you need to be re-verifying status at the start of every school year. And so I recommend that you use your housing questionnaire at the beginning of every school year for every student, as well as using an end of the year re-verification letter, so that maybe around April or May, you send out a letter to the families that are currently in McKinney-Vento, and you're going to re-verify that status again, that they are going to continue to need services, or maybe they found permanent housing and they no longer will be receiving McKinney-Vento services. But you need to make sure that you're identifying those students so that you can continue to provide any kind of supports and resources needed. It's extremely important that your enrollment staff and your front office staff know who the LEA Homeless Liaison is, or the point of contact. Again, if your front office staff don't know after they review the enrollment form who the contact person is, then that kind of is going to interfere with the immediate enrollment, because under the federal law, immediate enrollment is fully participating in school and extracurricular activities, tutoring, and all those things needed for your students to be able to be successful. So if there is a lack of who to contact, then those services can't be started immediately, and you'll be out of federal compliance. So you got to make sure that front office staff know who that point of contact is. You also want to make sure that your housing questionnaire is translated into your frequently used languages in the LEA. So not only English, but if you have Spanish or whatever language is the most dominant in your LEA. Again, a sample housing questionnaire can be found in ePlan, TDOE resources, and there's no sign-on required to access TDOE resources. So anytime that you need to look at some documents or the toolkit or anything related to McKinney-Vento, you can go into ePlan and just go into TDOE resources and scroll down to Title IX. It gives you the breadcrumbs on the slide on how you can find these resources. So I just provided, just so you can kind of see what kind of forms are in the toolkit. This is the housing form that the department has released for LEAs to use and tailored to their LEA needs. Each form in the toolkit does have instructions on how to make it fit your LEA. Again, your questionnaire does not have to be multiple pages. It could just be a couple of pages. But you want to make sure that you do have some way of identifying these students. So you want to remember that all family and student situations are different, and McKinney-Vento eligibility is based on a case-by-case situation. So you're going to really have to ask those questions, and you're going to have to really make those families feel comfortable so they can really provide that information and feel comfortable about sharing their information, their personal information with you. So some things to look at when you're identifying homeless students are your common signs of homelessness. Maybe it might be fatigue. They might have difficulty concentrating. Maybe they're sleeping in class, or they're chronically hungry. They might be exhibiting some bad behavior that typically maybe it's an underlying issue of being homeless. And so maybe you might be thinking, oh, this student is just a bad kid, but really it could be due to their home situation. And so you really want to make sure that you're looking at these signs and helping these students determine what resources, what wraparound supports they need. Again, this kind of goes back to training your staff. Well, I'm going to kind of talk about professional development. Your staff need to know how to recognize these common signs so they can help you with the identification of McKinney-Vento. Again, back to providing those wraparound supports and those resources to these students. The National Center for Homeless Education has this document that you can go and get for yourself that you can use for your professional development. So again, enrollment is an essential factor in the education rights of homeless children and youth. LEAs must develop, review, and revise policies to remove barriers to the enrollment and retention of homeless students, including barriers to related outstanding fees, fines, or absences.
I love you.
Homeless children and youth have the right to enroll in school immediately. Again, you heard me mention that earlier. They have the right to enroll in school immediately, even if they're lacking that documentation that's normally required for enrollment. And so you might have questions about their living situation, that they maybe really aren't being truthful about McKinney-Vento eligibility, but you have to enroll with families, and then you'll begin that process to determine whether or not they truly are McKinney-Vento. Again, enrollment is defined as attending classes and participating fully in school activities. That means making sure the student is arriving to school on time. Transportation cannot be an issue. You need to make sure that you're getting those needed services to support the academic needs. Again, immediate enrollment, you can't take 3 weeks to get that student transportation set up. I understand that bus transportation is not easy to access and not easy to get that route going to that particular area or to that student, but that cannot be a barrier to immediate enrollment. The student needs to be enrolled, and then the next day at the latest, the student is attending school. If that means providing a temporary means of transportation through gas reimbursement or maybe your local services like Uber or your local bus routes provided by the community. But again, that's very important to getting that student enrolled immediately. So liaisons are required to help families with obtaining these needed documents. That may be working with the family to set up appointments, taking the students to these appointments. Maybe the parent has to work, and so they're not able to take off and leave their job. And so as a homeless liaison, you're tasked to help that family determine what's the best way to get these documents. You also want to work with your community-based organizations to help maybe get that student the documents or any kind of resources that they need. For the schools, again, cannot deny enrollment to any student if they can't produce the normally required documentation. You may say that the family is dragging their feet with getting their immunizations. If that's the case, find out why. Ask those questions like, what can I do as the homeless liaison to help you with getting these needed documents? The school section criteria. Students experiencing homelessness may attend either the local attendance area school, which is any public school that a students living in the same attendance area are eligible to attend. So if they're in a local school, their local area where they're living, if they're that school they want to attend, that's called their local school, they have the right to attend their local school. But if they're outside of their local school and they want to go to their school of origin, which is the school the child or youth attended when permanently housed, or the school in which the child or youth was last enrolled, they have the right to stay in their school of origin. Sometimes it may not be in the best interest of the students to stay in their school of origin because it may be a 2-hour drive one way to get to the school of origin from where they're living. And that, of course, is not going to be appropriate for a student to be on the bus that long. And then, of course, under federal law or under Tennessee law, it cannot be more than 1.5 hours one way. So, again, the student has the right to the school of origin. Sometimes it's not in the best interest, but they do have the legal right to attend that school of origin. So like I just mentioned, there's no federal law for time or distance limited place on the school of origin transportation. However, under the Tennessee Code annotated, no student shall be allowed to remain on any form of transportation for more than an hour and a half in the morning and an hour and a half in the afternoon. Students may continue attending the school of origin to the entire time that they are homeless. And if they move into permanent housing until the end of the school year. So again, let's remember, just because they move into permanent housing doesn't mean their services automatically stop. They will stay McKinney-Vento eligible until the end of the academic year, which brings us back to the importance of re-verifying your McKinney-Vento status every school year. Again, like I mentioned, I'm sorry, Hannah.
Sorry, as you're talking about transportation, you've got a question in the comments.
Okay.
Can you provide the timeline requirements in writing? Many districts are struggling with drivers and routing delays. And if there's a hard and fast timeline, I need to pass that along. So I guess, is there a hard and fast timeline?
Yes, I will be glad to send that in written documentation. It's a federal guidance that immediate enrollment means that you can't, again, wait 2 or 3 days to get that student enrolled. Of course, if it's the weekend, then you'll have to wait till Monday. But yes, Catherine, I can get that to you as well. Yes, I can also share the Tennessee Code annotated, definitely. Yeah, I can provide pre-K transportation in that document as well. Yes, it's important that you do provide that pre-K Head Start transportation. Again, under federal law, you want to provide comparable services to any student that's attending any school or any education that is run or has an umbrella through the LEA. So if your Head Start program is run through your LEA, then you'll need to provide that transportation comparable to what's being offered to your kindergarten through 12 students. But yes, I can definitely provide all that documentation. When I send out the information with the slide deck and the recording, I will also drop all of this citation and other documentation as well with the email. Those are great questions. Thank you. So let's look at transportation and best interest. So again, LEAs must provide a transportation for McKinney-Vento students, transportation to and from the school of origin that's comparable to what's being provided to other students in the LEA. So for example, if your LEA does not have a bus route, because that's just not the school, the LEA is just not big enough for school bus routes, and the comparable transportation or what is provided is the students walk to school, the students ride bikes to school, or the parents may drop them off at school, then those are the services you're going to provide to those McKinney-Vento students. Again, it's got to be comparable to what's being offered to everyone else in the school. So if you do have a pre-K system that their bus transportation, maybe you don't provide bus transportation to that pre-K student or to the pre-K families, then you can provide gas reimbursement for this family. But because it's not something you offer to every other student that's a pre-K or Head Start eligible, then you will not provide that service, that bus route for those Head Start programs as well. Is there any other questions around transportation before I go on? Again, the key is comparable services. What you're providing to every other student is what you're going to provide to your McKinney-Vento student. So LEAs must transport homeless students to and from the school of origin at a parent or guardian's request or at the local liaison's request for unaccompanied homeless youth. If the child or youth lives and attends the school within the same LEA, that LEA must provide or arrange transportation. When a student's school of origin is different from the local attendance area, the LEAs must agree on how to split the responsibility and the cost of transportation or share them equally. And if there's some disputes around that, you can also reach out to myself at the state level, and we can help determine those costs. Making the best interest determination in accordance with the statute. Of course, you want to presume that remaining in the school of origin is in the best interest of the student. You want to consider the fact of mobility on achievement, education. If the student's moving around a lot, that's going to definitely affect how they're going to be academically and educationally impacted. So you want to give priority to the parent's request or the guardian or unaccompanied homeless youth. If the school or parent or guardian youth disagree after the best interest determination, then of course you're going to start your LEA dispute resolution process. So then that brings us to the dispute. Under the law, state education agencies, SEAs, and local education agencies, LEAs, must have a dispute resolution process in place when parents, guardians, or unaccompanied youth and schools disagree on the eligibility, enrollment, or educational placement of homeless children and youth. So your dispute resolution needs to be, we have a state level dispute that we have that's on TDOE letterhead. You may mirror that dispute, but it needs to be on LEA letterhead in order to be in compliance. Again, like I said, the LEA's process must mirror the SEA's process. There's 4 levels. Level 1 is appeal to the school or the LEA's homeless liaison. Level 2 is going to appeal to the LEA director of schools. Level 3 will appeal to the state coordinator. And then level 4 is the appeal to the state assistant commissioner of the Division of Federal Programs and Oversight. So you can find the dispute resolution brief at the National Center for Homeless Education. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, it really kind of breaks down the dispute resolution and how to have the dispute resolution process, what is required. And so it's really, I think it's a very good piece for you to take a look at. I think it's about 4 to 5 pages long, but again, it has some very useful information. And then I provided a sample for you to use. It's step-by-step directions on how to use the document for your LEA. Again, I can't stress enough that all the documents that you use from TDOE must be on LEA letterhead. Again, like I mentioned, there are 4 levels. Level 1 and 2 are at the LEA level, and then 3 and 4 are at the state level. Again, here's the dispute. You want to make sure that on your dispute, you have all 4 levels. If you only have 3 levels, it could be a federal finding or a recommendation needing when you have your LEA monitoring. So again, to make sure you have a complete dispute resolution process in place. If a dispute arises over eligibility, school selection, or school enrollment, the child or youth shall be immediately enrolled in school in which enrollment is sought. So that student will be, if they want to stay in their school of origin, then they will stay in the school of origin until the final, pending the final resolution of the dispute, including all available appeals. And so that student will stay there until all of the dispute has been resolved. Of course, you're required to give a written explanation of the dispute resolution decisions made by the school, by the LEA, and by the SEA, and that's the parent's right to have that information, and they have the right to appeal each level. Again, for more extensive information, you can access the dispute resolution brief at the National Center for Homeless Education. So let's look at professional development. As homeless liaisons, you're tasked to ensure that school personnel receive professional development and other support focused on McKinney-Vento. At a minimum, liaisons should be providing training to your LEA annually, to your school leaders, to your front office staff, your enrollment staff, your social workers and your school counselors. But as a best practice, it's good to include additional training to your cafeteria staff, your janitorial staff, your classroom teachers, your educational assistants, your bus drivers. All of those people are those that are working every day with these students and who can help you identify these McKinney-Vento students. So again, while it's only required that you do your front office staff and your major staff, it's a best practice that everyone in the LEA is trained on McKinney-Vento supports, resources, and identification. That will definitely help your programming. You should definitely include your identification and the common signs of homelessness so they know what to look for. You want to make sure they understand the immediate enrollment policy and who to contact when a student has been identified for services. You also want to make sure they know the rights of the parents and the students. And then you want to make sure everyone understands the right to privacy. And that you want to make sure that they understand that they don't want to be talking about all of this information in front of, everyone as they're enrolling in the front office staff. You want to have a little private area where you can take these families and talk to them about McKinney-Vento. Again, the National Center for Homeless Education has several great training materials and resources for you to use for your staff. You can also use the TDOE slide deck for your staff training. There is one on identification that I have. As long as you don't alter any of the slides, you can use any of the department's slides to provide your training. And last, we're going to talk about your responsibility for your preschool, your higher education, and your HUD. So it's important to remember that ESSA places an increased emphasis on identifying homeless preschool children. The school of origin also includes public preschools, so you need to make sure that your children are, if it's run by the LEA, that they are staying in their school of origin and their preschool. Homeless children must have access to and receive services through early learning programs. And again, if you haven't already heard, there's a new Head Start referral app that Schoolhouse Connections has, and we have the opportunity as a state to pilot this new Head Start referral app. I think it's a great opportunity to look at maybe participating in this referral app, because again, under federal law, you're required to provide those supports to those preschool and Head Start children. A lot of your unaccompanied homeless youth have the higher education aspirations, but they run into a lot of barriers when it comes to enrollment and attendance and just really kind of going through the process of getting all of this documentation needed for things outside of high school. And so it can be a little overwhelming. Under McKinney-Vento, you're required to make sure your school counselors can advise these homeless unaccompanied youth about the opportunities that are available to them and about what kind of community supports are available for these students. Again, you want to verify any kind of information documents faster for these students so they can get that student aid in order to be able to attend college. You also, as a homeless liaison, you have the right to affirm whether children or youth meet the HUD definition of homeless to qualify them for HUD homeless assistance. So it's important that you understand that HUD definition of homeless is different from the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless. And so you have to make sure you understand the HUD definition, and you can verify that these children do fall into the HUD definition. The family must still meet other requirements for HUD projects. Homeless liaisons may make the affirmation in the form of a signed letter on LEA letterhead that at a minimum identifies the most recent primary nighttime residence of the homeless child or youth. So quickly we'll look at effective practices and collaborations. You really want to make sure that you're collaborating with other LEA homeless liaisons. Maybe they have some homeless programming tricks of the trade that they've learned over the years that's really been working well for their homeless programming. Maybe they have just some ways that you can really relate to help your homeless families. So it's really good to collaborate with other homeless liaisons. You want to make sure that you're referring homeless students to academic services, whether it be tutoring, intervention, wraparound supports. You want to make sure that you're encouraging students to participate in extracurricular activities. We all know that students that are in extracurricular activities perform better educationally and academically. They also will learn to work as a team and learn how to socialize and work with other students and peers. You want to collaborate and communicate with families. You want to have that good working relationship with them. If they feel comfortable, they will share their situation with you, and they will be willing to accept services and resources, and they will be willing to share with you if there's something going on in the home that maybe initially wasn't first addressed. And so you want to make sure you're building those relationships. You want to make sure that your out-of-school assignments contain realistic expectations. So if your teachers are providing outside assignments, these students need to have access. So if it's an internet assignment, your homeless student needs to be able to have access to internet. If it is, doing some research about a program, if they don't have internet or a computer that they can access, then you're going to set that student up for failure. So you want to make sure, again, that goes back to training your staff about homeless children, so that way everyone in the LEA can make sure that these students are getting the services and supports that they need. I can't stress enough that you need to be working with community-based organizations, food banks, post-secondary institutions, nonprofits such as your Boys and Girls Clubs. You want to work with HUD, your health department. Those community-based organizations will help offset maybe any of your McKinney-Vento, your ARP homeless funds that you may not be able to provide all the supports. You can get maybe under federal law, you can't buy mattresses or bedding for homeless students, but your community-based organizations can help get those things that are not allowable under McKinney-Vento. Just a quick example of the LEA level and school level support that you can work together with. Again, it's very important to remember that each family and student's circumstances are different. And the McKinney-Vento Act requires liaisons. Make sure that your students are getting the same free public education as provided to all students in the LEA. And as a liaison, you must make sure those barriers are removed to identification and enrollment of homeless students. You want to make sure you're keeping good documentation for each family and what supports and services are being provided, and that you can also provide those supports and service lists to those families so they know what they can, what services they can find. Again, I've talked about written policies and procedures. Those must be kept in place, and you can refer back to those when a parent or unaccompanied youth have questions about their identification and about their status. If a dispute arises, you have all that information at hand. At the start of every academic year, Homeless Liaison should ensure that every school in the LEA has an updated homeless poster posted in a common area of the school. Again, when we do monitoring with your LEA, this is something that we look at. If these posters aren't have the updated LEA information as well as state coordinator information, it could be a federal finding or a recommendation needed. As you can see, I've provided my information for you to put on the posters. It's not required that you put my email address on there, but you're welcome to as well. But it definitely needs to have the phone number. You can also order these posters from the National Center for Homeless Education. And then, as always, I have these resources for you to be able to look at and kind of dig into. Again, ePlan has a toolkit where you can find McKinney-Vento resources and templates, as well as you can find the non-regulatory guidance for education, for homeless education. And then the U.S. Department of Education also has a great resources for you to use as well. So I know I've covered a lot of information very quickly, and these slides are going to be available again after this webinar, but I'll open the floor up for any questions if you guys have any. You can either unmute your line or you can drop them in the chat box. And I will again make sure that I send in the email the documentation about transportation, information about the Tennessee Code annotated, and all the requested information from the chat. If you have any questions, you can keep putting them in the chat box. And I'm going to go ahead and share the survey. If you don't mind, let us know how we're doing at the department, and if this information was useful for you. Again, please put any questions in the chat box or unmute your line while you click on the code on the slide. Did I miss any questions in the chat?
When will navigator allocations be an e-plan?
We finally got procurement approval, and so I have a meeting with the e-plan coordinator this afternoon, and we hope to have those in e-plan by tomorrow or Monday at the latest. I will have an email with guidance on how to budget the funding. So that has finally been approved. Yay. It took procurement long enough, but we're grateful that they have finally got it all figured out. All right. Well, again, I appreciate you joining me. Here's my information for those of you who may not have it. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. Don't feel like you're bothering me. I'm here to help you support your homeless programming any way I can. If I don't know the answer, we can get the answer for you. But again, please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions that you may have. I appreciate you joining me today. I hope you have a great rest of the day. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.